What up, and welcome to the Worship Pastor Podcast. We're here to talk about leading in worship. How do we keep God first, lift His name, and so much more. Now let's see what the guys have lined up for us this week. Here's Jonathan and Andrew. What up, and welcome to the Worship Pastor Podcast. I'm Jonathan King.
And I'm Andrew Johnson.
And we are chilling out here in the backyard, enjoying what's left of this nice weather here in Ohio.
Yeah.
And
It doesn't last very long.
No.
No.
I've already converted to fall cold mode.
Yeah. Flannels.
It was like 70 the other day, and I had my long pajama pants on, and then I stepped outside, and I was like, oh, it's warm today. Oh, summer. We're having summer today.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, that's the way it works.
So anyways, Andrew, thank you for
Yep.
doing this with me, my friend.
No problem.
My brother, I should say.
Yeah.
For those of you that don't know, this is my brother-in-law, and we're brothers from another mother, basically.
That's true.
And he tell him about you. I don't want to sit here and talk about you and
Right.
let them just stare at your pretty face. Let's have them hear your voice a little bit. Tell me about yourself so they know.
Well, I've been in church my whole life. My grandpa's pastor, same church my whole life, actually.
Yep.
And that presents its own challenges
Oh, sure.
because for so long I thought, like, this is the only way we do things.
Right.
Like, we do it the one way.
And this must be the only way.
And this has got to be the only way, So, when really there's so many different ways
Sure.
to do it, and so I think the concept, as we talk about like worship,
Yeah.
you kind of learn as you go what works best, and it's a congregational thing. It's not
Right.
like
It's not a
one.
show.
Yeah, there's no cookie cutter way
Right.
to do it. So I was sang all my life. Singing's been a big part of my life. My family singing, and Lauren and my sister, and so I think being up in front of people for so long, it actually in my experience, it's easier to be in a crowd of people, on stage,
Sure.
than it is to be like one-on-one
Right.
talking with people, because you get used to that.
Right.
And then I became ordained in 2011, pastor for a little while, and then kind of went through a divorce and things. And that opened my eyes to, because I'd been in the same church for so long,
Sure.
I kind of took I don't want to call it a sabbatical because I was still in church.
Right.
But
right,
I
right,
went
right.
to different churches.
Right. You wanted to
Had
kind of go
get
check
away.
something else out. Yeah.
And I think that's a big part too, is like your spiritual walk
Right.
is your spiritual walk. And
Right.
for so long, it blurred the lines of what is my spiritual walk and what
Right.
is my family's spiritual walk.
Right.
What am I supposed to do and
Yeah,
what
yeah,
am I
yeah.
called to do?
Absolutely.
And two totally different things. So worship's so important. And I think the biggest thing for like worship pastors and worship leaders and anyone that's on praise teams is your worship does not start at 11 o'clock or 10 o'clock. Like,
Right.
your worship has to be daily. And I know
Right.
a guy that he said that he plays Spotify
Mhm.
and he plays worship music in his house when he's not home
Right.
because he's preparing his house for
Nice,
worship before he even gets
nice.
home.
Very good.
And so like those are things I think that we pick up as we go and get a little
Sure.
older to realize, like you said, it's not a show.
Right.
It's our worship and our praise. And it's not just our worship,
Right.
but we have this great responsibility of leading
Right.
the congregation in worship. And that's
Right. And let's talk about just for a minute, like, at our core, obviously we're all human.
Yeah.
And we struggle with sin daily. And one of those things when you're in a position, especially for a long time and maybe even growing up doing it, being in front of people, it's easy to hear things and compliments that people say,
Yeah.
and you can construe it the wrong way in your heart.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, that's may not be your intentions,
Right.
but it's something you have to be on guard for, because
Right.
you don't want to be going up there with a puffed up chest and here I am, I'm doing this for God, and all that stuff, which we are, but you want to have the right heart about it. And a
Yeah.
lot of that comes from, like you said, one, not taking it for granted, but two, like worshiping all the time.
Right, and I think that I heard a pastor say one time that if you're not careful, you will prostitute your calling for your gift.
Right.
And
Wow.
so I think there's so many people that are gifted.
Right.
God's given them a gift to sing, to play music, to write music that, I mean,
Right.
is just amazing.
Yes.
And then they're using that for things that aren't honoring God
Right.
because they've actually now traded
Right.
their calling for their gift. And so it's hard though. It's a hard balance, especially when you're younger.
Right, absolutely.
And I think too,
that's huge.
A big thing is, in my experience, and I think even in my life, is we as a society now are giving young men and young women positions that they're not groomed for.
Right.
And you think about,
because you want to be young and hip.
Well, you think about Jesus and the time that he spent, like, by himself,
right,
and with God, and
right,
that time he spent in seclusion and in what's the word I'm looking for? Not in the spotlight, kind of back, because God
in the shadows, kind of.
God works in that time because his public ministry didn't start right away. There was a time that he was kind of set out.
Right. And he was a little younger than me.
And learning, yeah. I mean, that's the thing. So, like, we have to remember that sometimes just because it's not, we measure success by numbers.
Right. Absolutely.
And a lot of times it's not that. It's your spiritual growth. Is your congregation spiritually growing?
Right.
Are we preparing ourselves for, and I know you do a great job of, like, tailoring the worship to the sermon.
Sure.
And really, you don't know completely what it's about.
Right.
But you have a premise.
You can get bullet points.
Right. And kind of like lead people to that. And so
get the heart set and ready for what's going to be presented to them.
I think song selection is definitely a big thing.
And it's not like you just, sit down and throw some songs together on a list and say, this is what we're going to do.
Right.
I mean, sometimes it may feel like that because, one day you may feel more in tune than you were maybe another day or something, sure, because, that happens.
Yeah.
But, you have to not only worship during the week, like you said, but, like, pray about, Lord, lead me in this position that you've put me in.
Yeah, and I know there's a lot, you have to be flexible because there's a lot of times that we've come into practice in the morning and it's like, I'm really not feeling this song, or I am feeling this song, and we kind of trust each other and making those calls. I don't know if you can maybe kind of talk about your process in song selection and stuff during the week, because I know that it's tough when you're introducing a new song to a congregation. So it's like you have to keep the oldies in there, or the songs that people know because they sing along, and then trying to introduce a new song.
And it's easy to get excited about the new song, or maybe a couple new songs, and you're like, oh, let's go do all the new songs.
You want to throw them all in, and it's like, and then
I'm so excited for this one.
And I don't know if you've ever gotten this, and we can cut away to a squeaky sound, but like, the congregation's looking at you like
crickets,
and they're just not. And it's not that they don't like the song. They just they don't know it.
They don't know it. Right. Absolutely.
So I think trying to get people to engage is a big thing. But then,
and it's a difficult balance, because part of that is kind of knowing your congregation, knowing the pulse of your church as far as music goes. Because, like, I've spoke with other worship leaders, and they'd have a smaller list of songs than we do.
Right.
And then B, they would have a rotation that was a lot closer than ours were. Or ours is.
Yeah, I mean, we may not. I know that I don't know what a lot of people run, but I know Pro Presenter is a big thing.
Right, absolutely, game changer.
And I love Pro Presenter.
Yeah.
And as I've gotten to know it more, I like it more. But I know that as I'm entering in new songs, I'm thinking, man, like, we've got a lot of songs, because there's weeks that we go that I have to enter every song.
Right.
And so it's like, and then we keep a good balance of, like, hymns.
Right. We do a blended service.
Right, which a lot of churches now I know are doing.
They'll either have a separate service, or there'll be one or the other.
And sometimes I think that might be easier, but then also that's another challenge, because you've got a whole other, like, almost genre.
Right.
And so.
Right. And I mean, you have to, you want to choose music that resonates with the congregation, because, like I said earlier, we're not just putting on a show, we're preparing their hearts
for sure
for the word, through worship. So yeah, it's definitely a difficult balance, and there's many different ways to do. Yeah, to do.
And I think one thing, like, from this podcast, like, and I know your heart in starting this thing, and it's kind of like, I want people to know you have someone to reach out to if you are you have someone to reach out to if you are maybe struggling, because the big thing is, like, it's a great responsibility.
And it can be a lonely responsibility.
It can, and I think about you, and there was a time where you were kind of a one-man band.
Right.
Literally. Right. And, it was just guitar. And sometimes it's still that way, and
Sure.
you have to be able to adapt. But that's a lot of pressure on somebody to play all the right notes,
Right.
program it out,
Right. Yeah.
and then try and make sure it's executed.
Right. And it flows well. And
And
there's
take care
not a
of
huge
and take
pause.
care of young kids.
Yeah. And
I
there's
mean,
not a
it's
huge pause between a song or whatever.
and trying to make that flow, and so like, I just know that it gets cumbersome.
Sure.
I know from pastoring and from teaching.
And at
from
one point,
preaching.
you did the worship and the sermon.
Yeah, I mean,
you did everything.
that was even worse.
That's something I've never had to do.
Right, because I'm so focused on the worship part that
Right.
sometimes the sermon would struggle,
Or vice versa.
or the other way. Yeah, and sometimes it would almost be too like scripted
Sure.
to where it's kind of like
Because
almost-
you know exactly everything
almost-
that's going to
yeah,
boom, boom,
it's
boom,
almost
boom,
corny.
boom, boom, boom. Right.
like it's almost rehearsed and
11 o'clock, start this.
robotic.
11:05, start this.
Yeah.
11:07, start
And if the music goes along with every single point
and
all-
over analyzing because you know the sermon.
right, that's what I'm saying. So it's kind of good, that you only get the bullets because
Right.
and
You
then,
could easily overanalyze.
And then I know I kind of would like to get some input maybe on like invitation
Right.
from other guys that because y'all I'm sure do it differently.
Mm-hmm.
Some churches don't do like an altar call, traditional altar call anymore.
Right.
We do.
Right.
But then sometimes that seems like because we don't pick the song ahead of time.
Right.
We try and let that flow.
It's been a struggle for me because, like you said, you want it to flow.
Right.
If the preacher preaches about one topic,
Yeah.
like literally says, come to the altar
Right.
in the sermon,
Yeah.
and then you go up there and sing Amazing Grace.
Right.
It works, but it wouldn't make as much sense as, hey, let's do
It
Come to the
flows
Altar.
with the point, right? And then sometimes you get to the point where it's like you have a song picked out and planned, and it doesn't fit because the pastor or whatever. And I've been here like my point, even though I've got an outline,
Right.
the Holy Spirit kind of goes, "Mrr."
Right, and your point ends up being something totally different.
Yeah. And so like then the song changes, and you just kind of got to feel
Right.
what's going on, and that's a whole nother challenge. But I'm kind of curious. I don't know about you of what other people
What
do
other people do.
on that,
Absolutely. Because typically, just because it's easier, I usually go up by myself or I'll take
Right.
one person with me. And most of the time, I'd say 80% of the time, I probably just do an old hymn, like a typical.
right. Yeah, and it flows,
call song.
and it's more simple. There's less hustle and bustle of like a whole
Right, you don't
band
have a whole team going up there.
Yeah, and
Hey,
and
could
so-
the worship team march their way up
yeah,
here, please?
I mean we've had that before,
Right.
at some point. So like I just kind of like I want everybody to know like we don't think we have all the answers.
No,
We're talking from experience.
that's not the point. I
Talking
mean, and
from
that's why I want to
experience.
talk to other
right.
people.
And that's why I think this is going to be a great thing because it's like we're not only I think other people aren't only going to draw from this. I think we can draw.
Oh, yeah,
from
we'll learn.
and
Absolutely.
all grow and mainly
And create relationships, because when I
That's
said it can be a lonely responsibility, I am not kidding. It can be a lonely responsibility, a very rewarding responsibility.
Right.
And thankfully, I've been blessed. My wife and I usually sit down and go through what music we want to do on
Right.
Sunday, which is awesome.
Right.
But I know not everyone, you might not have that opportunity.
And not everyone's a family group to where
Sure.
we've said things in practice that's
Right,
kind of been like if
absolutely.
I wouldn't say it to somebody that
Right.
wasn't related to me.
Right.
If
It
one of
just so
those-
happened the position that I'm in, my worship team is all family.
No,
Either by
for the
blood or
most
by,
part, yeah.
by marriage. The
Yeah.
singers are typically. Now we have
Right.
other singers that come in and sing with us
Yeah,
and
and
do
other
specials and
instruments and
stuff.
things, but-
and then other instruments, they're not
But
family.
for the most part, we are
right.
because
so it can get a little testy.
because let's not forget. There's my grandpa always said. He said the devil lives in the choir loft.
Right.
Because that's where people are going to get offended.
Yep.
That's where people are going to feel slighted. That's where people are going to feel. And so that's an awesome responsibility because not
Right.
only are you upholding this group
Right.
and trying to keep everybody happy, you're also trying to go along and go with the pastor's vision for the church.
Right.
Because ultimately, we have a shepherd,
Right.
and that's kind of who we answer to.
Right.
As far as and knowing that,
And I'm going to get him on here too, because I want
Good.
to talk about worship in the sense of, that
Now,
point of view.
Right. We've been blessed,
Yes.
in our congregation that our pastor, we have a good relationship, a good working
Absolutely.
relationship to where we all sit down and we kind of talk and plan out, quarters and things like that. So that helps. So we know
We
the
just
vision.
had our meeting for the rest of the year.
Yeah, we know the
all
vision.
the holidays coming up.
'Cause-
Our favorite time of year.
break out jingle bells and all that stuff. And we're going to sing songs that we don't know any words to.
Right.
So,
Yeah, absolutely.
But that's another challenge. So,
Right.
But also it's kind of great to be able to, I just want to, I'm thankful that I get to be a part of it.
Yeah.
There was a time in my life that I didn't know if I would do that anymore.
Right.
you know, and because that's a whole nother topic of, you know, your family life, and I know that it struggles
Do
sometimes.
you feel obligated because it's your grandfather's church?
Yeah, and it's like,
At the end of the day, you have to do what God's calling is
Right.
for you, not
and then you kind of come to the point like, am I doing it for me?
Right.
Like, am I doing it so that I can get the applause? And am I
Right.
doing it because I just
All
like
that-
to sing?
all that human stuff we
Yeah,
talked about.
right. And so like, but then I think the big thing is I know that as I sat there, like the call was always on me.
Right,
Like that I wasn't made to just sit there.
right.
But the biggest thing was learn how to worship from the pew.
Oh, yeah, that's huge.
And my worship
Totally
from, my
different.
worship from the pew is the same as my worship on the platform.
Right.
And that is the key to it
That's
all.
absolutely huge.
Because I have a lot to worship about.
Right. Yeah, there's a saying, worshiping on the platform needs to be more than just you don't go there to just fill yourself. That's what I'm
it.
looking for.
Yeah.
You don't go on the platform to help lead worship to fill yourself.
Right. Yeah.
Because you're there to prepare so many
Right.
believers and
Yeah.
even non-believers
Yeah.
for what's about to take place.
Yeah.
So, you can't, go about it like you say for the wrong ways.
Right.
And that's difficult.
And the thing is too, you got to remember, and I know you felt this, like when we get done on Sunday mornings, we are drained.
Oh, it's tiring.
And it's not just a physical drain; it's kind of a spiritual drain.
Yeah,
it's like you've
absolutely.
worked up,
You
and you
pour
guys
into it.
I'm sure people know what we're talking about.
Oh, yeah.
it's like this, and we always called it Baptist moments. We just nap.
Yeah,
nap.
yep.
But it really is. It's physically, spiritually, emotionally draining.
Right.
But that's the way it's supposed to be,
Yeah.
because we're supposed to give out more than
Right.
we.
Now
take.
we still feel good.
Right. We
We feel refilled.
right exactly.
know.
But I think I think your filling comes a lot more at home.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Because you are expending so much.
Right. If you drive a lot of miles, you're going to need gas more than once
That's
a week.
it. I mean, I'm telling you, that's it. Yeah, that's true.
So yeah, that's definitely.
There's just
huge.
so many layers to it and so many angles to this.
Right.
Great responsibility, but very rewarding.
Yes.
Because
absolutely.
I count it, like I was saying before, I was saying that to say this. I count it a privilege
Right.
every time I walk up there.
Absolutely.
That I get to do this. And I think I've started something new in my life to where instead of saying I have to do this,
I get to do it.
I get to do this. So like I
Right.
used to say one time, I told Dad one time, I said, I got to preach Sunday. And he said, you get to preach Sunday.
That's
And
right.
there was a time where I thought it was I have to preach Sunday.
Right.
And then when it's all stopped and God still had that call in my heart, it's like I would give, I feel it.
Right.
Like Jeremiah said, in my bones, like it's exploding out of me if I don't get it out.
Right.
I think it was Jeremiah.
I think so. That
We're gonna
sounded
have
right.
to my
We'll have to play that game.
Yeah,
Bible or grandma?
yeah, Bible or grandma, yeah.
But yes, let's go with a question. You give me an answer.
Okay.
Right now in this season of your life, outside of reading your word, praying, and obviously listening and worshiping, that type of stuff, what else do you do to help keep you focused and filled up?
Okay, one thing I do that I've went to some counseling, mental health things, and they talk about refilling and self-care.
Sure.
But what they're talking about in that is more of a self-care of your mind and your body.
Sure.
But I practice self-care of my soul.
Right.
And so that sometimes means I will, a lot of times when I'm struggling, I'll play worship music.
Yeah.
And I don't have to listen to it. And I'll play the Bible app, just
Sure.
playing scripture.
Yeah.
Because here's the thing. The word I've hid in my heart.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I think that it says that about hiding it in your heart, it's because the world, they will strip you of a lot of I don't want to say your anointing because they can't take
Sure.
it from you, but
Right.
it's like if the devil can't take my anointing,
Right.
if the devil can't take my oil,
Right.
right? And the anointing's on my life, and that's what people see when we're on the platform, John,
Right.
is the anointing.
Yeah.
Everything else is just vain
Right.
and vanity and words and songs, and it's pretty and it flows and it's nice and it
Right.
sounds good, but really it's nothing. It's
You can minister all the truth in the world,
yeah.
but if the spirit's not there,
Right.
it's not like the Bible said, in spirit and in
Right,
truth.
in truth. So like it's like
And spirit's
I
number
hide,
one.
I hide that because it's precious
Right.
to me, and so like as I go through my week, like I said, the devil can't take your anointing. He can't
Right.
take your oil, but he can make you think your oil's not worth anything.
Bingo.
And so I have to remember, I am who.
Don't want to give the guy too much credit, but we
I
need
am
to be
who
weary of that.
I am who he says I am.
Right.
I'm a new creation. Old things passed away, all things become new. And I have to preach that to myself. And
Oh, yeah.
And we forget to preach to our soul,
Yep.
especially preachers
Right.
and worship pastors. Like, we have to preach that daily to our soul.
Right.
And so I think
Yep.
just speaking words of life
Yeah,
into
we're
my
filled
life.
with flesh and blood like everybody else.
Man, I tell you, I quit. There's one thing that, like, and maybe you've had this, like, in construction and stuff,
Yeah.
because I'm an electrician too, and I know you do construction. It's like people say, "How you doing?" You say, "I'm living the dream."
Right. Living the dream.
And that's kind of speaking death into my life. Like,
Right.
no, I'm blessed.
Right.
Highly favored. Can't complain.
Right.
One thing I always said was, can't complain. If I did, no one care anyway.
Wouldn't do me any good.
But like, and these are the old sayings that we
Right.
hear, but speak life into your life.
Right.
And so that's kind of where I'm
And
at.
that's one thing, and I'm not trying to down talk anyone in the congregation for that matter, but I think sometimes they take for granted, they're getting ministered to,
Mm-hmm.
but we're doing ministering.
Right.
Now, obviously, we get ministered to,
Right.
but we talked about it being draining and everything like that. When you're doing the ministering,
Yeah.
it's important that you make sure your cup gets filled.
And you have to. And
That's why if you're close with anyone in your congregation,
Yeah.
and they say, "How are you doing?" Say, tell them the honest answer,
Right.
but ask them to pray for you.
Yeah, that's it. And lift it. And it's one thing to that confess your faults one to another. It's one thing. It doesn't mean confess your faults to everybody.
Right.
It means confess, because it says the other brothers will lift you up. Those that are spiritual
Right.
will lift you up. And
Right.
so that they're going to go to pray. I make it a habit. I don't ask people to pray for me that I know aren't going to pray.
Right.
And
Right.
and you say, well, that's kind of judgy. No, it's not. It's
Right.
it's saying I value that.
Well, and that's
prayer.
one thing I've tried to do differently in my life. When somebody's going through something, or I see a post on Facebook and old friends
Yeah, don't
struggling,
just put pray hands.
I'll say I'm praying for you, but I actually make it a thing to stop what I'm doing right
That's-
then and there, close my eyes, and pray for that situation.
Right, yeah.
Now, is it diligent, fervent, everyday prayer? No.
Right.
But it's a step in the right direction, because I'm not just saying I'll pray for you
Right.
and then totally forgetting when I do my devotions
Yeah, and
to pray for
it's
you.
when people stop you in the hallway. And
Yeah.
that's a whole other thing too.
Right.
Everybody, there's one of you and 50, 100 of the
Right,
or
right.
whatever. But when people stop you and say, "Hey, pray for me, I'm struggling." Well, let's pray right now.
Yeah, why not?
And because we forget, like we're human.
We're supposed to pray without
We get
ceasing.
busy.
So why
Yeah.
not?
We get busy, and you're human. It goes
Right.
back to the human aspect, and I think that's important to remember. But yeah, I think that's a great point, actually.
Right.
To stop and actually pray one for another, and pray for your congregation. I wonder, how many times I've went, and there's that song that says, I'm sorry for every song that I just sang the words to.
Right.
And I'm sorry that I just went through the motions.
Right.
I'm sorry that I just sang another song.
Right.
And we have to realize that we as worship pastors and we as worship teams and tech teams and different things, like, we're not just singing a song. Like, these are songs that talk about deep subjects,
And precious
and they're
things.
real.
Right.
Yeah, and they've brought, I know there's certain songs that I hear them, and it's like, it brings back those memories of where God brought me from.
Right.
And so when we're doing that, remember, it's not just another song. It's not just another service. It's not just us. It's every single service
Right.
is important.
Yep, absolutely. And I think I totally skated past it, but you asked me earlier kind of what my process was.
Yeah, I did.
So back to that.
Yeah.
So obviously, prayer is very important. Lord, guide me and direct me in this. May your will be done. May we step out of the way so you be lifted up.
Right, yeah.
But besides that, I usually try to get a feel for what the sermon's going to be about.
Right.
Obviously, if we're doing a series, that helps.
Yeah.
Because then I have a rough idea.
Right. Our pastor's pretty
Pretty organized.
organized in that, and that
Yeah,
helps. That
which is
helps.
great. But even if we're not doing a series just yet, or we're between, I like to get the title of the sermon, maybe a few bullet points.
Yeah.
And
What's the
then
general concept?
right, and then from there I go to the list,
Right.
which I not me, my wife, misorganized,
Yeah.
has everything split up. You know, we have praise and worship songs, we have hymns, we have specials. So we've always been a very musical church. I've only been around, you know, for 8 years, worship leader for about 4, I think it's been.
Yeah.
But it's always been very musical. So like, it's nothing for us to do congregation songs, maybe a special or two, you know, and then more praise and worship or a hymn
Right,
or
and
whatever
we're
the case
blessed
may
in
be.
that. I
Yes,
mean, you know.
and that's great for me because I love it. I love the music, you know.
Right.
Obviously, we're there for the word, but the music is enjoyable and important.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, so I'll sit there and I'll pretty much just start building out the list. I usually try and start with a faster one. You know, people are coming in, sitting down. We're Baptists. We
They're
can't be
late.
on time.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
But, you know, something faster, upbeat. Make sure they're awake.
Right, yeah.
You know, and then usually
familiar to people.
Yeah, something familiar. So usually an old hymn most of the time, or maybe a faster praise and worship song just to mix it up.
Yeah.
And then usually from there we roll straight into another song.
Yeah.
So I try to make it a key that works. Or I got this
Right.
really sweet slidey capo. I can just go like this and
Yeah,
change
that's the other
change my
thing is-
spots. But then usually we'll have them sit down, give them a break because at this point they've been standing, and then I'll usually throw in a special.
Right.
And then Pastor Trent comes up,
Yeah.
says maybe an announcement or a few, greets everybody, does the
Right.
offering, prayer, all that jazz.
Yeah.
And then we'll either do a special or we'll just roll right into, you know, 2 usually more somber
Yeah. Right.
praise and
More
worship
leading up
songs
to
to
the sermon.
really, you know, make sure that our hearts are prepared for the service. So, you know, trying to get songs that go well together. Not saying that the whole service is a sick mashup,
Right. Right.
but like, you know, you
The transitions.
you want the transitions.
Because I
to be
remember
fairly smooth.
there were years ago that we had transitions that were long. Like,
Oh, yeah.
It was like a
Lot of
dead noise, and it really kind of throws things off. And I think one thing that we do
It can be distracting.
one thing we do really well, and John does really well, is rolls into the next song.
Yeah, I try.
And if not, he's got something in
Like
there.
a few weeks ago when I broke a string, that was terrible.
We-
But
Oh, wow. That is unfortunate.
we prevail.
Yeah, he said that never happens.
But anyways,
Yeah, I think that's a big thing is learning how to bounce back. Because
right.
I know I used to struggle with it. If something were messed up, it'd be like, well, there we go.
Right, there's the
We're
service.
done, you
The
know.
devil was-
Yeah, the devil won that one.
Right,
You know,
right.
The devil's in the sound booth. No, because my phone doesn't work either. So like
Right.
he's not in
Right.
cell phone. So
Yep.
I think like you said, we give him too much credit sometimes.
Right. So, anyways, yeah, just basically sit there and run through the list. Obviously, try and bounce it off of my wife if she's not there with me helping me do it.
Right.
Sometimes I'll get you guys' opinion.
Yeah.
And, you know, there'll be specials that people work in, and I may not do it the week that they requested it
Right.
because it would make more sense with next week.
Right.
You know, something like that.
Yeah.
But that's pretty much the process. Obviously, I know for you, you're the computer guy.
Yeah.
You sing, obviously, but you
Right.
also prepare all the visuals,
Yeah.
the words, all that
Yeah.
stuff. So talk to me a little bit about, you know, what the thought process is between that with that, because now, you know,
It's a whole nother
technology.
animal.
Yeah, you're not just saying, "Hey,
Yeah.
let's go to page 247."
Yeah, that's it.
You try and make the background match, and
That's
look
it.
cool,
And
so.
and I think one thing that I try and do is I watch a lot of YouTube videos.
Sure, absolutely.
I read a lot of articles
Yep.
on this kind of stuff. And one thing that I know with Pro Presenter, you know, some churches will do less lyrics,
Yeah,
almost one-liners
Right.
on each slide.
but we don't technically have. Well, Jordan's almost the sound
I
guy.
start-
She's,
yeah,
she's the
I mean,
tech. We'll
I
give her
know.
that because she
And-
clicks through the
and see, that's
slides, and we
one-
used to have to do it with an iPad.
One thing I try and do now is I try and lay it out so that it's one click. So like we can actually hit the space bar all the way through.
Right.
So as long as you got somebody with good attention span,
Right.
I mean, you can click right through it, and pretty much anybody can run it. Now, if things go wrong, that's a totally different story.
Sure.
And so that's where it's
Yeah.
good to have somebody
The
that
computer
does it.
screen's like, not today.
Yeah, I mean, there's stuff that I still can't explain, but
Right.
I think the one thing I try and do is I try to make it easy to read
Right.
because we've got people that like bigger letters.
Sure.
So I try and make them as big as possible.
Right.
Try and make it all flow like lines with songs.
Yeah.
And Lauren's really good at
Don't
that.
make it difficult for us either because
try and-
we do so many songs.
Right.
I'm not gonna lie, we cheat and we rely on the words maybe
Man,
more than we should.
I'm telling you, that's the truth. And
But that helps us.
right,
you
and
know.
and so that's the thing is I try and not make the backgrounds too distracting.
Right.
You know, just think about how it's going to flow.
Like a Saved by the Bell background.
Yeah, I mean, because
for their opener while we're singing Amazing
we're not
Grace.
doing the big, we're not doing the big chevron, like
Yeah,
light show in the
Yeah,
back
yeah.
and stuff. So, it's kind of like, and we don't have our sanctuary super dark.
Right.
So that limits us a little bit on
Sure.
on different backgrounds because it just looks like black.
Right.
Because the colors and
The contrast of
But
the situation.
that's a totally different thing. So there's just so much. I think if people, that are maybe watching this or listening to this that don't necessarily know what all goes into a Sunday morning,
Right.
if you knew, I think maybe you would maybe have a different appreciation for it. Not that people don't appreciate it.
No, I know what you mean.
But I think that if you knew everything, and we've been doing it for so long that we don't even think about it.
Sure.
And like you talked about Jordan, like she come in and it's like, what is, what's all this? And
Right.
it's because there's so much that goes into it.
Right.
Hours beforehand.
It's like when I used to film a lot of weddings,
Mm-hmm.
and not everybody was like this, but some people I think just presume that I show up with the camera,
Yeah.
press the record button, go home, put it in my computer, export it,
and make
I'm
a bunch
done.
of money. Yeah. And
But it's so much more than
I
that.
have
A
seen you
wedding would
edit
take me
for-
up to like 40 hours,
Right.
like a week's worth of
Yeah.
full-time job work to get it completed.
to edit and to
And so, like you say, there's a process to everything, and this
Yeah.
has a pretty big process.
And if you're doing it right, people don't even know.
yeah,
And that's what I told. We were training a new sound guy this morning.
Yeah.
And it's like I said, if you never get noticed,
you've done a
you're
good job.
doing your job right. It's when
Because
people.
if something goes,
Everybody does. What's everybody
goes,
do?
What's the sound guy doing?
Right. They look back at the sound guy.
Mine.
Mike?
And so-
Mike?
Now
Made
we
me
did
think of that
learn.
meme.
We did learn to make our sound booth
Yeah,
higher.
a little higher. It's
you
harder
can-
to
you
make
can
the eye
duck down,
contact. Yeah, you can duck.
high.
Oh, nobody's back there.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So now that I'm thinking about it, I'm like, geez, we did a lot of stuff on Sunday morning. But,
But yeah.
Yeah.
Anyways, that's pretty much all the time we have for today.
Yeah.
Andrew, I really appreciate this. I really appreciate you being
I
able
appreciate
to
you. That's for sure.
be in ministry next to you.
Yeah.
You help me out more than you know with my duties and stuff at the church. So, anyways, we're going to be back with more content. Like I said, right now, just starting out, we're shooting to release an episode every 2 weeks. That way I don't get overwhelmed.
Right.
You don't get overwhelmed. My family gets overwhelmed. So, yeah, and we're going to have some good interviews coming up. I got some
I'm
worship
excited.
leaders. I'm going to talk to some pastors. Sound guys, get their perspective. Maybe we can learn something in that sense.
Some pickers and grinners.
Yep.
I'm
Absolutely.
excited about really the content and things coming up.
Yeah,
So,
what's coming up down the
Yeah,
line. So,
definitely.
anyways, thank you so much for tuning in. As always, like, subscribe, download the episodes, share it with your friends. God bless you, and have a great day.